I'm Savannah Sterling, 36. I was driving my vintage convertible across the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway through sheets of pounding rain. The plan had been simple: arrive at the estate, sit through the will reading, and leave. My suit was pressed, my nerves steady. But when I pressed the brake pedal, my foot met nothing but air. No resistance, no warning, just the sickening slackness of a severed line. At 60 miles an hour, I understood the truth. My family did not just want me disinherited, they wanted me gone. So I made a decision. I was not going to the hospital. I was going to the funeral. Before I tell you what my mother's face looked like when her dead daughter walked into the parlor, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to see how far this story travels. To understand why my mother tried to kill me, you have to understand the design of the Sterling family. We lived in the Garden District of New Orleans in a mansion that smelled of jasmine and old money, but the foundation had been rotting long before I was born. My mother, Catherine, never raised children. She cultivated assets. My sister Courtney was the golden child, the perfect showpiece groomed for pageants and society galas. She was beautiful, obedient, and completely empty inside. I was the spare, the black sheep, the inconvenient daughter who asked questions and refused to smile on command. While Courtney learned how to wave from parade floats, I learned how to read blueprints, pour concrete, and negotiate zoning permits. I left home at 18 with nothing but a duffel bag and a stubborn need to prove them wrong. Over the next 15 years, I built a boutique hotel empire worth $30 million from the ground up without a single dollar of sterling money. Every time I closed a deal or opened a new property, my mother never congratulated me. She only asked why I could not be more like Courtney, who had never worked a single day in her life. People always ask why I stayed in contact, why I tolerated being treated like an outsider in my own bloodline. The answer is complicated. It is the trap of normalized cruelty. When affection is rationed like water in a drought, you don't realize you're dying of thirst. You assume that's just how love works. They didn't start by cutting my brake lines. They started by forgetting my birthday, then dismissing my grades, then ignoring my achievements. You learn to accept the unacceptable in small doses until the poison starts to feel like home. I believed that if I became successful enough, rich enough, useful enough, they would finally see me. I was wrong. Usefulness became my death sentence. The turning point was my grandfather, Arthur. He was the patriarch, the only one who cared about the business instead of appearances. When he died last week, the shield protecting my mother disappeared. Arthur was the only one who reviewed the ledgers. His death meant the estate would be audited and the will would be read. My mother knew what that audit would reveal. She knew about the $4.5 million missing from the charitable trusts, and she knew that I, the only competent business person in the family, would spot the discrepancies immediately. She did not hate me because I was a failure. She hated me because I was the only person capable of exposing her. Eliminating me was not personal. It was a business decision. That's why I was on that bridge that night. And as I stood on the roadside with rain mixing into the blood on my face, I realized something. The time for seeking approval was over. I was not going to the will reading to inherit anything. I was going there to burn their world down. I parked my rental car at the edge of the crushed shell driveway, leaving the wreckage of my convertible behind for the police to discover later. The walk to the front door of the Sterling estate felt slow and heavy. New Orleans humidity clung to my skin, mixing with sweat and dried blood along my cheek. I had not changed clothes. My white blouse was stained a dull rust color, and my left arm was wrapped in a crude bandage made from a silk scarf. I looked like evidence, exactly as intended. The library doors were closed. Inside, the air conditioning would be humming, preserving antique books and my mother's composure with equal care. I did not knock. I pushed the heavy oak doors open with my good arm and stepped into the cool, perfumed silence. The scene inside looked staged. My mother, Catherine, sat in a velvet chair, dressed in flawless black silk, daubing dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Courtney sat beside her, delicate and grieving in a pale dress that probably cost more than my first car. Mr. Budden, the family attorney, sat behind my grandfather Arthur's massive mahogany desk, reading from a thick document. The silence that followed my entrance was absolute. Not respectful silence, shocked silence. My mother's handkerchief slipped from her fingers. Her expression shifted from practiced grief to pure terror. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might collapse. Courtney made a strangled sound and gripped the arm of her chair until her knuckles turned white. They were staring at a ghost. They had expected a call from Highway Patrol, a tragic accident on the bridge. They had not expected the victim to walk into the room. "Miss Sterling," Mr. Budden said, his voice breaking as he stood. His eyes widened as he took in the blood on my shirt and the scrape along my jaw. "My God, what happened?" "I had some car trouble, Mr. Budden," I said, my voice rough but steady. I did not look at him. My eyes stayed fixed on my mother. "Someone cut the brake lines on my convertible." I paused. "But I survived." Catherine did not speak. She could not. She just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. I walked to the empty chair opposite them and sat down. The contrast was violent, their pristine, manicured elegance against my battered, bloody reality. "Please," I said, gesturing to the papers in Budden's hands, "continue. I believe you were discussing the future of the estate." Mr. Budden looked from me to my mother and then back to the document. He was a smart man. He had served Grandfather Arthur for 40 years. He saw the blood. He saw the terror in Catherine's eyes. And he remembered the instructions Arthur had given him in strict confidence just 2 weeks ago. He slowly set down the standard will he had been reading, the one that left the entire estate, the mansion, and the controlling shares of Sterling Hospitality to Courtney. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a different envelope. It was sealed with red wax. "There is a secondary protocol," Mr. Budden said, his voice dropping an octave. "Arthur was very specific. He drafted a codicil, a conditional amendment." "What are you doing?" Catherine snapped, her voice shrill, finally finding her tongue. "Read the will, Budden, the one Arthur signed in 2018. "I cannot," Budden replied, his hands shaking slightly as he broke the wax seal. "The condition for this amendment was simple. It activates immediately if Savannah Sterling is harmed or prevented from attending this meeting by unnatural means." He looked at my bloody shirt. "I believe the condition has been met." Catherine lunged forward, but it was too late. The seal was broken. The poison pill had been swallowed. Mr. Budden adjusted his spectacles, his hands trembling just enough to rustle the heavy parchment. He did not look at my mother. He could not. He looked straight at me as he read the words that would dismantle the Sterling dynasty. "I, Arthur Sterling, being of sound mind and suspecting foul play within my own house, hereby decree the following. In the event that my granddaughter, Savannah Sterling, is injured, threatened, or impeded from attending this reading, the previous last will and testament is immediately null and void." The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating, like the pressure drop before a hurricane. "Effective immediately," Budden continued, his voice gaining strength, The entirety of the Sterling estate, including the Garden District Manor, the investment portfolios valued at $100 million, and the 51% controlling interest in Sterling Hospitality, shall bypass the natural line of succession. All assets remain the sole property of Savannah Sterling. 100 million. The number hung in the humid air between us for a heartbeat. Nobody moved. Then Catherine shattered. It was not a scream. It was a guttural animal sound of pure rage. She did not look at the lawyer. She lunged across the gap between our chairs, her manicured claws reaching for my face. "You did this," she shrieked, her mask of high society elegance disintegrating into something feral. "You ungrateful, manipulative little wretch. You hurt yourself just to steal what belongs to Courtney." I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I sat there, smelling the copper scent of my own drying blood, and watched her unravel. This was the woman who had demanded perfection for me for 36 years, now reducing herself to a tantrum in front of the family attorney. "Sit down, Mother," I said, my voice cold and flat, "or I will have security remove you from my house." My house. The words hit her like a physical blow. She froze, her chest heaving, realizing the power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted. She was no longer the queen of the Garden District. She was a trespasser. Courtney was sobbing now, a soft, pathetic sound. "Mom, please," she whimpered. "Please stop." "Do not you speak to me," Catherine whipped around, turning her venom on her favorite child. "You let this happen. You were supposed to be the future." But the escalation was not finished. The heavy oak doors of the library swung open again, but this time it was not a servant with tea. It was two uniformed officers from the New Orleans Police Department, their rain slickers dripping onto the antique Persian rug. Behind them stood a detective I recognized from the news, Detective Landry. "Excuse the intrusion," Landry said, his eyes scanning the room before landing on the bloody bandage on my arm. "We received a call from the mechanic towing a vehicle off the causeway. He found something interesting. The hydraulic lines were not frayed. They were cut clean with wire cutters." Catherine stiffened, her back straightening into a rigid line of defiance. She thought she was untouchable here, protected by the walls of her mansion and the weight of her name. "This is a private family matter," Catherine hissed. "Get out." "Attempted murder is not a family matter, Mrs. Sterling," Landry replied, stepping further into the room. He did not walk toward Catherine. He walked toward the weeping woman in the mourning dress. "Courtney Sterling," the detective said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "We found a receipt for industrial wire cutters in your vehicle's glove box during the tow. We need you to come with us." The silence that followed was louder than the storm outside. Courtney looked up, her eyes wide and vacant, like a doll whose string had been pulled too tight. She did not look at the police. She looked at our mother, begging for permission to speak, begging for a way out. But Catherine did not look back. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of stone, already calculating, already cutting her losses. And in that moment, I realized the horror had not ended on the bridge. It was just beginning. The click of the handcuffs was small, metallic, and final. Courtney did not fight. She just slumped, her spine giving way under a weight I had not seen until that moment. The officers were reciting her rights, but she was not listening. Her eyes found mine, and for the first time in 33 years, the mask of the perfect debutante was gone. There was nothing behind it but terror. "I had to," she whispered, her voice a jagged shard of glass. He has Madison. I froze. Madison? My 7-year-old niece? The family narrative was that she was at an equestrian camp in the hill country. Who has her? I demanded, stepping closer despite the officer's hand raised to stop me. Curtis, she choked out. Uncle Curtis. She is not at camp. She is at Serenity Hills. Serenity Hills? The name made my blood run cold. It was not a camp. It was a high-end juvenile psychiatric facility on the North Shore, a place where wealthy families stashed inconvenient children to avoid scandals. And it was owned by a private equity firm controlled by our uncle, Curtis, the man who had always been the family's shadow. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The sabotage was not just about greed, it was coercion. My mother and uncle had not just corrupted Courtney, they had weaponized her motherhood. They had taken her child hostage to force her to kill her sister. I looked at Courtney, really looked at her, and the anger that had been fueling me since the bridge began to curdle into something colder and more tragic. I had always envied her. I had hated her for being the chosen one, the golden child who got the praise, the dresses, the love. But standing there, watching her weep for a daughter she could not protect, I saw the truth. Being the golden child was never a blessing for Courtney. It was a slow destruction. I grew up the black sheep, neglected, but free enough to build a spine. Courtney never got that chance. Our mother hollowed her out and filled her with obedience until she was not a person anymore, just Catherine's extension. She was not the villain. She was the first victim. I did not want you to die, Courtney sobbed as officers led her away. They said if I did not stop you, Madison would never come home. Where is she? I demanded. Ward 4, restricted access. As the squad car lights faded into the rain, I knew my mother was already calculating her next move. She did not care that Courtney was in handcuffs, only that her plan had failed. My niece is being held in a medical black site, I told Detective Landry. We are not done. We need proof, he said. Serenity Hills is a fortress. I will get it. To do that, I had to stop being prey. I had to hunt. That's why, hours later, a wire was taped beneath my blouse as I walked back into the Sterling estate for dinner. Agent Miller's instruction echoed in my ear. She must admit to the $45 million and the kidnapping. Catherine greeted me at a table for two, composed as ever. I want to talk business, I said. Courtney's arrest puts Sterling hospitality at risk. I need to know the exposure. The bait worked. She leaned in. $45 million was not stolen, it was reallocated, she said smoothly. Your grandfather never understood what it costs to maintain our name. And the brake lines. It was a calculation, she said flatly. You would have exposed everything. I protected the family. That was the confession. The doors burst open. Federal agents, do not move. Catherine's mask shattered as the cuffs closed around her wrists. She glared at me with pure hatred. You wire-wearing little traitor. You think this makes you powerful? I am the head of this family, I said. She tried one last weapon, telling me I was weak, just like my father. But she did not know what I knew. Grandfather told me about the affair, I said, about Uncle Curtis. Courtney is not Edward's daughter. I am the only legitimate Sterling heir. Catherine collapsed, finally defeated as they dragged her into the rain. I looked at the empty chair she ruled from for decades. The rain was over, and I was the only Sterling left at the table.